Okay, let's go ahead and begin. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Emily Kloss, and I work in communications at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and I support the Clean Energy Solution Center, which is an initiative of the Clean Energy Ministerial. I'll be helping to coordinate today's event, which is titled Global Hydrogen Review and Northwest Europe Hydrogen Monitor. And today's event is also hosted in collaboration with the Clean Energy Ministerial's Hydrogen Initiative. So a few housekeeping items today before we get started. The first is that this webinar is being recorded and it will be shared with attendees. So as an attendee, you can expect to receive a follow-up email in the days following the event with a link to the recording, the slide deck, and any other helpful materials shared during the session. You will be automatically muted upon joining and throughout the webinar, but if you would like to add comments, share input, or share introductions, we encourage you to please use the chat feature. If you would like to ask questions at any point to our technical presenters, you can do so by using the Q&A function on your Zoom toolbar. And there's a graphic on the slide here that shows you what that Q&A icon looks like. Please note that we do have time carved out at the end of the event for Q&A, but you can ask questions to our presenters at any point during the session, and we'll make sure they are answered at the end. If you're having any technical issues, please use the chat feature to message Holly Darrow or myself, Emily Kloss, and we'll be happy to help you. And you can adjust your audio through the audio settings, but you're having any issues, you can also dial in and listen by phone, and all of your dial-in information can be found in your registration confirmation email. And lastly, we will be launching a survey when this event ends, and your feedback is highly valuable to us. And with that, I will now hand it over to Jal Desai, who will introduce our webinar topic, our speakers, and also give an overview of the Clean Energy Solution Center.
Thank you, Emily. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you all for joining today's webinar. I know it's going to be very productive and interesting webinar. This webinar is brought to you by Clean Energy Solution Center and Hydrogen Initiative, two of the work streams of the Clean Energy Ministerial. I welcome all the participants and speakers. It is great to see the participation from around the world. Let me give you a rundown of agenda and speakers for today. So my name is Jal Desai. I'm a researcher at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Golden, Colorado, USA. I'm an engineer by background. I work on various domestic and international projects in various capacities. And NROL is the operating agent of some of the Clean Energy Ministerial workstream, and I manage the Clean Energy Solution Center at NROL, who is co-hosting this webinar. And I'll be moderating today's session as well as giving a brief overview of the Solutions Center. So first, and then we'll hand it over to Carla Robledo, who will be giving you an overview of the Hydrogen Initiative. So Carla is a senior policy advisor at the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Policy of Netherlands. She holds a PhD in chemistry, and she has worked on the hydrogen team at the ministry since 2019. She's a co-led representative on behalf of the Netherlands for the CEM Hydrogen Initiative and coordinates two of the working groups, the Roundtable on the Northwest European region and the Global Hydrogen Trade Forum. Next, we have Jose Bermudez, who will be giving an overview of the Global Hydrogen 2022. Jose is an energy technology analyst at the International Energy Agency, IEA, where he coordinates the analytical work of the IEA in hydrogen technologies. He's also the coordinator of the Clean Energy Ministerial Hydrogen Initiative. Jose has more than 15 years of professional experience working in research, innovation, and energy policy in the areas of hydrogen, bioenergy, and alternate fuels. Lastly, we'll be hearing from Greg Molnar on topic Northwest European Hydrogen Monitor. Greg joined the International Energy Agency in August 2018 as a gas analyst in the Gas, Coal, and Power Markets Division within the Directorate of Energy Markets and Security. The division is responsible for the development of short and medium-term market forecast and the publication of the Global Gas Security Review. Before joining the agency, he held several positions in consulting and private research companies with focus on European gas markets and gas infrastructure. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So I'll give you a brief overview of the Clean Energy Solution Center. So Clean Energy Solution Center is one of the initiatives or work streams under the Clean Energy Ministerial. The objective of the Solution Center is to broadly accelerate the transition of clean energy markets and technologies of developing nations. This initiative is co-led by Australia and the United States. And NREL, which is National Renewable Energy Lab, is the operating agent. We have got more than 40 partners to deliver services free of charge to the users to help developing countries to achieve clean energy transition. Our website is here on the page, and you can go to the Clean Energy Ministerial homepage and look at other work streams and find out about Solution Center as well. Solution Center assists developing nations through three main offerings. Next slide, please. So the three main offerings are Ask an Expert services, training and capacity building, and resource library. With Ask an Expert is designed to help policymakers in developing countries and emerging economies to identify and implement clean energy policy and finance solution. The Ask an Expert service is up and running, so any government organization or any other organization working on behalf of government can reach out to the Solution Center, and we have a network of more than 50 experts spanning from 15 countries. And then the second service is training and capacity building. So since inception, we have delivered 300 webinars, which has more than 20,000 public and private sector stakeholders. And in the end, the third service is resource library. We have more than 1,500 curated resources, policy briefs, journal articles, and we're in the process of updating that as well. That's a kind of a quick overview of the Clean Energy Solution Center. And if you have any questions, please do reach out. Now I will hand it over to Carla to give a brief overview of the Hydrogen Initiative. Over to you, Carla.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here and welcome everybody. Happy to tell briefly about the CEM Hydrogen Initiative, its origin, the members, and the activities that we are undergoing. Please, next slides. So the Clean Energy Ministerial has several initiatives, one of them being a hydrogen initiative launched in 2019. With its main objective to raise international ambition and advance commercial scale of low carbon hydrogen deployments on the long term and across all sectors. So in 2019, there was a very large momentum for hydrogen. And since then, there have been a lot of initiatives launched on hydrogen. We are working together. And within this is a government-led initiative together with colleagues are Canada, the European Commission, Japan, the Netherlands, and the US. And we have more than 20 governments involved. Also, the Hydrogen Council and individual companies and ports are involved in the advisory meetings. And we are, as I mentioned, coordinating with also other international hydrogen initiatives such as IPHE, also the Hydrogen IEA Technology Collaboration Program, and more. So basically, we have ambitions, we have targets from the governments, and we use this platform to share these knowledges, to also seek how we can advance on these ambitions, what is needed on the political level. We have a yearly Clean Energy Ministerial session with the ministers. So it's a great platform to discuss all the updates and the policy and also the market developments. Within the Hydrogen Initiative, we have different working groups and different activities ongoing, which are led by different country members. So one of them is the Global Aspirational Goals. Here, the European Commission is leading this together also with the Global Ports Hydrogen Coalition. And mainly within the Global Aspirational Goals, goals. It's an overview of all the countries' goals, and what we are aspiring to is made, and it's also part of the Global Hydrogen Review of the IEA, which will be presented today by our colleague Jose. A Global Ports Hydrogen Coalition. This is a coalition of more than 60 ports present, and which also have to go through the transition to accommodate hydrogen derivatives, the infrastructure, and that really have a great platform to also raise these ambitions and to also have common goals on developing and share this infrastructure and sharing also the knowledge that is needed. The US is leading the Hydrogen Twin Cities program. So last year was the first initiative where cities around the world can be nominated and work together to also share the experiences within the regional developments, the local developments. And there's two different types of programs where knowledge is exchanged, but also a mentor-mentee program where maybe cities that are more advanced on this, on the hydrogen developments, can also share their experiences with the cities that have less knowledge on it. It's a really nice initiative. And also this year will be the second round. So please be also aware of the closing of the calls. From the Netherlands, we are leading two of the working groups, the International Hydrogen Trade and Supply Chains, which will be upgrading to one global hydrogen forum within the Clean Energy Ministerial activities, and the Northwestern European Hydrogen Market Coordination Group. We call it a roundtable for the Northwest European countries, which began as a regional group because, of course, in the Northwest European region, a lot of activities are ongoing on hydrogen, and it's great to have this platform to exchange our knowledge, our experiences, and to also work towards more regional policy developments. And within this activity, we have been performing the monitoring that Gerli will be presented later. And as last but not least, of course, the IEA Global Hydrogen Review tracking on policies and markets, which leads to a yearly report, which will be shortly presented. Next slide, please. And very brief about specifically about the roundtable in the Northwest European region, because from this working group is as a result and a product of this is the monitoring that will be presented today. I would like to highlight its main objective is with the countries. It started with the countries around the North Sea. We expanded a bit and involved are at the moment the Netherlands, Germany, Belgium, the UK, Denmark, Norway, and France. And we have aligned together with also the Pentalateral Forum group working on hydrogen. So also with Austria, with Luxembourg and Switzerland. And we have asked the IEA to perform this yearly market report to know the advancements on the market development, on the policies, to know if we are on track with the policies, instruments we are development on achieving the goals that we have set. So this is very good that we already have this first edition. And that each year we will be tracking the progress. So also this, at the end of this year, the second edition will come out. And this is one of our core activities within the working group. Also dissemination of these results, of course, and facilitating the matchmaking between importers, exporters. This will also be an activity that we'll be doing within the World Hydrogen Summit in Rotterdam in May. So with this, I would like to conclude this brief introduction and give the word to Jose, who will be presenting the Global Hydrogen Review. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carla. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Jose Bermudez from the International Energy Agency. I work here, as Joel mentioned, as an energy technology analyst, coordinating the work that we do on hydrogen technologies. And if you allow me just a second, I'm going to share my screen to present our Global Hydrogen Review. Here we go, which is an annual report that we have been putting in place since 2021, and which is a report that we release As part of our work as the coordinators of the Clean Energy Ministerial's Hydrogen Initiative, which is supported by more than 20 countries, and which of course are important contributors for the preparation of this report, where we explore annually trends and deployments around the hydrogen and its use as a clean energy vector and feedstock. Starting with the project, I'm going to say something that everybody that is following the developments on hydrogen is aware of, which is that the momentum behind hydrogen continue to be really strong. Hydrogen is today widely recognized as an important tool to support government climate ambitions, which itself can also simultaneously help in enhancing energy security by decreasing dependency on fossil fuels, by diversifying the fuel mix, and also diversifying the portfolio of suppliers. The net zero greenhouse gas emissions commitments that government have announced in the last few years have boosted the interest on hydrogen. And today, the global energy crisis sparked by Russia's invasion of Ukraine has further strengthened the interest, particularly on low-emission hydrogen, as a way to reduce, as I mentioned before, dependency on fossil fuels, particularly in Europe. Let me give you just a few examples on this progress that we are seeing, or this growing interest that we are seeing on hydrogen. Just in the year between the publication of our 2021 edition of the Global Hydrogen Review and the 2022 edition, 9 countries adopted a hydrogen strategy, and at least another 4 have published their strategy since September 2022, which raises the total number of countries with a hydrogen strategy in place to 30, and with more than 20 countries currently working on the development of their own strategy. Moreover, some countries have started to implement some of the policies that they have identified in these strategies to create some demand for hydrogen or to support first movers, but these cases are still very limited to some isolated examples. Industry is pushing for large-scale projects to produce hydrogen from water electrolysis and renewable energy, or fossil fuels with carbon capture, utilization, and storage, for some of which have a final investment decision has been already taken. Also, some major companies have started to sign offtake agreements for low-emission hydrogen for its derivatives, although most of these agreements are still non-binding due to the large uncertainty that's still on the future evolution of a hydrogen market. Finally, governments are looking at opportunities to accelerate the development of international trade for hydrogen and its derivatives, again, particularly with the objective of reducing dependency on fossil fuels as fast as possible. Japan used to lead efforts on this front, but the European countries have stepped up very strongly recently. However, the adoption of low-emission hydrogen as a clean industrial feedstock or as a clean energy vector is still at an early stages of adoption. Same as with other cleaner technologies, we need to effectively track progress to assess if the developments are happening fast enough and they are on a trajectory that can help hydrogen to play its part in the clean energy transition and to enhance energy security. And these are the type of questions that we are trying to respond every year with our Global Hydrogen Review. Let's talk about the point of departure, which is hydrogen demand. Hydrogen demand reached 94 million tons in 2021, which was already 5% higher than the demand in 2020. And it also represents a recovery to above pre-pandemic levels. When hydrogen demand reached its previous historical maximum at 91 million tons. However, there is no much to celebrate around this progress, since this is not a signs of real world success of implementation of hydrogen policies. The majority of this increase took place in traditional uses for hydrogen, meaning refining and the chemical industry. Hydrogen demand in those applications where hydrogen can play a significant role in transition to a net zero energy system grow strongly. They were 60% higher than in 2022, but this growth still comes from a very small base, and it only reached around 40,000 tons in 2021. These 40,000 tons still show important signs of progress, which come on the back of technological advances on those key applications that I was mentioning, that where hydrogen is likely to be needed for a net zero emissions future. A good example could be steel making. So the first pilot project for using pure hydrogen in the direct reduction of iron started operating in 2021, and only 1 year later, announcements for new such steel projects are growing very quickly, or were growing very, very quickly. If all those announcements were realized, around 2 million tons of low emission hydrogen could be used in direct reduction of iron alone by 2030. In transport, the fleet of hydrogen fuel, the first fleet of hydrogen fuel trains started operating in Germany in September 2022. And there has also been a strong growth of heavy-duty trucks, particularly in China. And in addition, more than 100 pilot and demonstration projects for using hydrogen and its derivatives in shipping are now under development all around the world. Now, whether or not all these projects will be realized is uncertain, of course, as it is their economic feasibility. Our analysis of existing policies and confirmed projects from all around the world suggests that hydrogen demand could reach 115 million tons by 2030. But our analysis suggests that less than 2 million tons would come from these new applications that I have been mentioning. We will need 130 million tons to meet the climate pledges that the governments have put forward all around the world, a quarter of which should come from heavy industry, transport, power generation, and the production of hydrogen-derived fuels. And we'd even need around 200 million tons for putting the world on track to meet net zero emissions by 2050. Increasing hydrogen demand is, of course, only one piece of the puzzle. The other is making hydrogen production cleaner than today. Much of the increase on hydrogen demand that I mentioned that occurred in 2021 was met by hydrogen produced from unabated fossil fuels, meaning that there was virtually no benefit for mitigating climate change. The production of low emission hydrogen was less than 1 million tons, practically all of it coming from plants using fossil fuels with carbon capture, utilization, and storage. This is, of course, highly unsustainable, but the good news is that the projects for the production of low-emission hydrogen are growing at a very impressive speed all around the world. Our analysis of the current project pipeline, or the announced projects, suggests that if all the projects announced that are today under development were realized, annual production of low-emission hydrogen could reach up to 24 million tons by 2030, with around 40 million tons coming from projects aiming to use electrolysis and low-emission electricity, and up to 10 million tons coming from projects aiming to use fossil fuels with carbon capture, utilization, and storage. These are impressive figures since they are equivalent to up to 70% of the annual low-emission hydrogen production that would be needed to meet the government's climate pledges, which shows that there is a much more momentum behind hydrogen production than behind hydrogen demand. These are, of course, as I mentioned, encouraging signs of progress, but there are still important challenges ahead because a planned project is not a project that we have in the pocket. A significant part of the projects are currently at advanced planning stages, but only around 4% of them are already under construction or have taken a final investment decision, a firm final investment decision. So we are still a long way from realizing the project pipeline. This slow progress on real world implementation is a consequence of uncertainties about demand, which makes difficult to secure off-takers, a lack of clarity in regulatory frameworks, and lack of infrastructure to deliver hydrogen to the end users. Nonetheless, I would like to underscore that the progress in electrolyzers, I was mentioning the potential 40 million tons of hydrogen production through electrolysis that could be achieved from the project pipeline. Well, this progress in electrolyzer is another important reason to believe a new energy economy that is emerging, following what happened with renewables, electric vehicles, and now heat pumps and electrolyzers. An important indicator of this new energy economy is manufacturing capacity. The numbers that I'm mentioning or I'm presenting today are actually not the same ones that you could find in our global hydrogen review, but an updated analysis of this topic was presented in our Energy Technology Perspectives 2023, which we have just released in January. Today, electrolysis manufacturing capacity is around 10 gigawatts per year, which is already twice what was available at the end of 2021. And when we take a look to industry announcements, we think that this manufacturing capacity could exceed 100 gigawatts per year by 2030. In other words, this is a very important industrial opportunity. China and Europe are currently expected to remain the leaders in the sector, accounting for around half of the expected manufacturing capacity. But around 1/4 of the capacity announcements have not identified a location for the manufacturing sites yet, and only around 8% of those announcements are firm with a final investment decision taken or are already under construction. These manufacturing sites can be expected to be close to main demand sites. And so provisions such as those in the Infrastructure and Jobs Acts or the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States could very well possibly make that a significant fraction of the capacity without an identified location or with a potential identified location but not with a final investment decision taken could be deployed finally in the US, which could, as I mentioned, attract significant manufacturing capacities from other regions. These announced manufacturing capacities would be enough to meet current government targets for electrolysis deployment by 2030, but will only be able to meet half of what would be needed by 2030 to stay on track with our net zero emissions scenario. And here again, the build out depends on government targets being translated into real world policy and early support for projects to ensure that they can reach final investment decisions and scale up. Another area which is attracting growing interest is the trade of hydrogen its derivatives. Traditionally, Japan and Australia have been spearheading efforts on this front, and actually the world's first shipment of liquefied hydrogen took place between Australia and Japan in February 2022. The current energy crisis and its implications for energy security mean that more and more countries are stepping up efforts on this front. Today, the trade of hydrogen and hydrogen-based fuels is limited to a few tons of hydrogen or these derivatives in sporadic shipments from demonstration projects. However, based on the export-oriented projects that are currently under development, we estimate that 12 million tons of hydrogen, either in the form of hydrogen or in the form of hydrogen-derived fuels, such as ammonia or synthetic fuels, could be exported annually by 2030, with the first projects actually becoming online at the end of this year or early next year. Whether or not these projects are realized, again, is highly uncertain. And in this case, is because the majority of these projects are at very early stages of development, and they are facing significant barriers quite specific to this sort of projects. An important challenge is to secure customers, to secure off-takers. Offtake and importing arrangements are lagging behind the scale of planned exports right now. Only 2 million tons of hydrogen have secured a customer or a potential customer, or have an identified potential customer within the project consortium. Another 2.5 million tons have identified a specific region to export, but there are no offtake agreements yet in place. Other uncertainties that we could flag are standards, regulation, certification, like infrastructure, lack of trade infrastructure, and the need to clarify how trade rules can apply to hydrogen and its derivatives. Quite related to hydrogen trade is the topic of hydrogen infrastructure, and it's also part of the current energy security debate. It's not only about climate change anymore, it's also about energy security, particularly in Europe, and even more particularly the question of how infrastructure, particularly existing natural gas infrastructure, can be repurposed to support the future development of hydrogen. As governments address their immediate energy needs due to the energy crisis, it is very important that they carefully consider how this new related gas infrastructure that they need to deploy to face their current energy needs can be designed to potentially support hydrogen in the future. In the case of natural gas pipelines, there is already some experience in terms of repurposing natural gas pipelines into hydrogen pipelines. It is significantly cheaper than developing a new completely dedicated pipeline, but there are certain limitations related to the materials and the replacements of existing auxiliary equipment. In the case of liquefied natural gas terminals, opportunities to repurpose vary depending whether the terminals will ultimately receive hydrogen or ammonia. Initial studies indicate that repurposing LNG terminals for ammonia can be possible at an additional 11 to 20% of the investment cost of a new LNG terminal. This is because significant parts of the equipment, such as the storage tank or the pipes, can be used for ammonia, even if the heavier weight of ammonia would limit storage capacity. Repurposing LNG terminals for liquefied hydrogen, however, face greater technical challenges because due to the much lower temperature needs for liquefying hydrogen, which limits the possibility of reusing existing equipment. This has important cost implications, since just the LNG tank alone accounts for half of the cost of the LNG terminal investment, and a newly built liquefied hydrogen tank to replace the existing one could be 50% more expensive than an LNG tank. In general, there is no experience yet in converting the existing LNG terminals to ammonia and hydrogen, meaning that all these cost estimates are still very uncertain. Finally, designing LNG terminals to be hydrogen or ammonia ready is another possibility, but this comes with uncertainty about the scale of future demand of hydrogen and derivatives, which also translate into an investment barrier. Finally, I would like to finish with a brief explanation of the policy recommendations that we have outlined in the report, starting for the fact that governments need to move from announcements to implementation. We spoke about the strategies that they have identified, but the policies that they have identified in these strategies, but the hydrogen market is still nascent, uncertain in terms of future evolution, and this is preventing first movers to reach or to take firm investment decisions. And governments need to take the next step and implement those policies to reduce risk and help first movers to take these decisions. There is a need to raise ambitions, particularly in demand creation in key applications. In the case of existing applications, investment decisions are hindered by the uncertainty around long-term development of energy prices. So policy actions to create demand for low-emission hydrogen using auctions, using mandates, using quotas, requirements in public procurement are needed to create this demand. In the case of new hydrogen applications, these policy actions should be complemented by innovation and demonstration efforts with a strong focus on sectors where hydrogen has more potential to both support decarbonization and reduce dependency on fossil fuels. Just related to my latest slide, governments and the private sector need to identify opportunities to accelerate the development of a hydrogen infrastructure and ensure that those short-term actions that are taken on the response of the energy crisis are aligned with the long-term plans for decarbonizing the economy. Almost finally, the creation of an international market for hydrogen trade will require to intensify international cooperation. And there are a number of areas in which governments need to work together, including the development of a standard for emissions intensity of hydrogen production and transport, defining robust and workable regulations, and cooperation on certification to ensure interoperability and minimize market fragmentation. And finally, there are a series of regulatory barriers that need to be addressed and removed. The presence of a clear and stable regulatory framework must be balanced with a dynamic regulatory approach calibrated to regular market monitoring. Actors involved on a hydrogen market will need clear rules, but applying very rigid regulatory principles in a nascent market could discourage these investments. And governments and regulators need to strike the right balance on these two aspects. Improving regulatory processes such as licensing and permitting can help shorten project lead times for hydrogen, but also for enabling infrastructure projects. So government should work to increase the efficiency and coordination among different agencies, different government bodies, different regulators to speed up these processes, of course, without compromising environmental standards and public consultation. And this is all on my side on the Global Hydrogen Review. So now I'm going to pass the word to my colleague, Gergely Mornal, who will present the Northwest Europe Hydrogen Monitor. So Gergely, floor is yours.
Thank you, Jose, and many thanks for this excellent presentation. My name is Gergely Mornal. I'm a gas analyst within the Gas, Coal and Power Markets Division of the International Energy Agency. And today, I would like to share a couple of the key findings of our Northwest European Hydrogen Monitor. As we all know, Northwest Europe is at the forefront of low-emission hydrogen development. The region accounts for around total hydrogen demand, has a vast and untapped renewable energy potential in the North Sea, and a well-developed interconnected gas network, which indeed could be partially repurposed to facilitate the transmission and the distribution of low-emission hydrogen from production sites to demand centers. So the Monitor is an annual report aiming to provide an update of low-emission hydrogen market developments in Northwest Europe. This includes an in-depth review of policies and targets, subsidy schemes and support mechanisms, supply, demand, and trade enabling projects, as well as developments related to hydrogen infrastructure, regulation, and the evolution of production costs. There is currently no international agreement on the definition of low-emission hydrogen. So for the purpose of the monitor, low-emission hydrogen includes three production routes from renewable-based and nuclear electricity via electrolysis, from fossil fuels via steam methane reforming or autothermal reforming with CCUS-based technologies, and as a third option from biomass via pyrolysis or anaerobic digestion. And I would like also to note that this does not necessarily reflect the official definition of the countries involved in the monitor on the carbon intensity or sustainability of hydrogen production methods. Now, we think that the adoption of hydrogen strategies, including medium and long-term targets, are essential to provide the necessary impetus and guidance for the development of hydrogen markets. In Northwest Europe, 9 out of the 10 countries included in the monitor have already developed hydrogen strategies or roadmaps, and Switzerland is expected to publish its hydrogen strategy this year. So the majority of Northwest European countries adopted production targets for electrolytic hydrogen, while Norway opted for a technology neutral approach. And altogether, Northwest Europe targets between 30 and 40 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity deployment by 2030. Since Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine, several Northwest European countries have doubled or are considering to increase their production targets. And similarly, the European Union has increased its ambition to rise hydrogen production to 10 million tons by 2030, complemented by 10 million tons of imports. And this rapid scale-up of low-emission hydrogen could replace between 34 and 68 BCM per year of natural gas by 2030. Now, in Northwest Europe, low-emission hydrogen production capacity is expected to reach 14 million tons per year by 2030 if all the announced and planned projects would become commercially operational by that time. And as such, Northwest Europe would account for around 80% of the total expected production capacity of low-emission hydrogen in OECD Europe by 2030. Now, based on the announced and planned projects, the United Kingdom, Germany, and the Netherlands would account for almost 70% of low-emission hydrogen production capacity of Northwest Europe in 2030. And electrolytic hydrogen is set to take the lead, meeting approximately 2/3 of total planned low-emission hydrogen production capacity by 2030, while the share of fossil fuel-based hydrogen projects equipped with CCUS would account to around 1/3 of the projected production capacity. Altogether, Northwest Europe low-emission hydrogen production could reach over 6 million tons per year by 2030. This being said, according to the IEA hydrogen production database, just 2% of the expected capacity by 2030 has already reached FID, and less than 1% of them are under construction. And as such, over 90% of these projects are in rather early stages of development, either conceptual or subject to feasibility studies. And this highlights the importance of subsidy schemes and support mechanisms. The scale-up of low-emission hydrogen will require an effective framework of subsidy schemes and support mechanisms along the entire value chain, including research and development, production, transportation, and also demand creation. Public funding programs and state-backed risk-sharing mechanisms, such as contracts for difference, can help to de-risk investment and improve the economic feasibility of low-emission hydrogen projects. In the monitor, we provide a detailed overview of the various subsidy schemes and support mechanisms available, both provided at the level of the European Union and at national level in the Northwest European countries. So indeed, it is very important to highlight that demand creation will be crucial to enable market development. Northwest Europe at the moment consumes approximately 4 million tons of pure hydrogen per year, and this is mainly concentrated in the refining and chemical industries. This equates to nearly 5% of global hydrogen demand and around half of Europe's hydrogen consumption. Based on the targets which have been announced, Northwest Europe low-emission hydrogen consumption could reach close to 7 million tons per year by 2030, with demand almost entirely concentrated in industry. So increasing the use of low-emission hydrogen will require not only the development of hydrogen production projects, but also the willingness of the end customers to use this low-emission hydrogen. So there is a need for demand creation, and there are instruments to stimulate investment, including via quotas and public procurement rules. We also see that Northwest Europe is set to play a key role in developing international trade in low-emission hydrogen. Based on current export-oriented projects under development, global hydrogen trade could reach 12 million tons per year by 2030. However, projects representing only 0.2 million tons per year have reached more advanced stage of development as offtake agreements and import contracts lag behind. We also would like to note that the Netherlands and Germany lead the import projects development with a combined volume of import expected to reach about 500,000 tons of hydrogen by 2030. And the role of ports in Northwest Europe will be fundamental in the definition of new import market for clean hydrogen. Major ports in the Netherlands, namely the port of Rotterdam and the port of Amsterdam, have plans for importing a combined amount of more than 5 million tons by 2030. We are portraying this in the second graph of this slide. And in Germany, the H2 Global auction-based mechanism will facilitate the conclusion of long-term import contracts for low-emission hydrogen and hydrogen derivatives. Under the H2 Global mechanism, the Hydrogen Intermediary Network Company, or HINTCO, will conclude long-term purchase contracts on the supply side and sales contracts on the demand side. The difference between supply prices and demand prices will be compensated by HINTCO using grant funding from the German government. So in a way, the long-term purchase contracts signed by HINTCO will effectively de-risk initial investment and enable companies on the supply side to set up production facilities on an industrial scale. On the user side, companies will be able to purchase green energy sources at economic prices for the first time and as such drive forward their decarbonization. So this large-scale deployment of low-emission hydrogen will need to be underpinned by a cost-efficient transmission and storage system strategically designed to connect supply and sources to demand centers. Northwest Europe at the moment has approximately 1,600 kilometers of hydrogen pipelines, accounting for over 95% of hydrogen pipelines operational in Europe. Most of them are closed systems owned by large merchant hydrogen producers, and are concentrated near industrial consumer centers. Based on the current targets set by Northwest European countries, the region's hydrogen network could increase by almost 8-fold to over 12,000 kilometers by 2030. So repurposing gas pipelines to hydrogen service can cut investment costs by 50 to 80% compared to the investments required into new hydrogen pipelines. And this in turn could translate into lower transmission tariffs and improve the cost competitiveness of low emission hydrogen. According to first estimates, close to 2/3 of the hydrogen pipelines operational in 2030 would be repurposed natural gas pipelines. And it is also essential that a harmonized regulatory frameworks for hydrogen emerge, because they enable the development of regional trade in low emission hydrogen, and they also can benefit cross-regional synergies in terms of production and demand creation. The European Commission published its hydrogen and decarbonization gas market package in December 2021. The package lays down the foundations for the integration of low emission gases, including hydrogen, into the broader European gas system. The proposed regulation provides guidelines on the gradual implementation of non-discriminatory third-party access to hydrogen networks, blending limits, tariffs, network codes, and operational transparency. We also see that harmonized hydrogen certification schemes providing evidence of the emission intensity of a given unit of hydrogen will be key to establish a regional hydrogen market in Northwest Europe amidst tightening regulatory standards. So this slide gives us a bit of an overview of recent dynamics related to hydrogen production costs. The majority of hydrogen in Northwest Europe is currently produced via steam methane reforming or autothermal reforming, and natural gas typically account for 70% of the levelized cost of production and for about 80% of the operating expenses. In 2021, the average production cost of unabated hydrogen produced via SMR stood at approximately $2 per kilogram of hydrogen. Hence, low emission hydrogen production routes were still not competitive with unabated production in Northwest Europe. Now, Russia's strategic behavior in using natural gas as a political weapon has intensified, obviously, since it started its invasion against Ukraine. And we all know that Russia reduced quite drastically its pipe gas supplies to the European Union, and the steep reduction in pipe gas flows drove up European gas prices to all-time highs in 2022. For instance, gas prices on TTF, Europe most liquid and most widely traded gas hub, averaged at $40 per MMBTU in 2022. This is more than 6 times their 5-year average. Consequently, the assessed cost of production of gas-based hydrogen increased to over $5 per kilogram of hydrogen, and the surge in gas prices contributed to over 90% of the increase in hydrogen production costs. Hence, the near-term cost competitiveness of hydrogen produced via SMR is contested, both abated and unabated. Gas-based hydrogen production via unabated SMR would be competitive against onshore wind powered electrolysis at a gas price below $20 per MMBTU. Now, I think that when we are looking a bit more the longer term horizon, our projection indicate that low emission hydrogen will be competitive with gas-based hydrogen by 2030, even when we are assuming that natural gas prices will be returning to their historic range. Natural gas with CCUS would be actually the cheapest production alternative, below natural gas with CCUS, assuming a carbon price of over 130 ton per CO2 equivalent. And the cost of renewable electrolytic hydrogen production would be between 2.5 and 3.5 kilogram of hydrogen. The strong decline in low-emission hydrogen production costs relates to several factors, including decreasing electrolysis, CCUS, and renewable technologies costs, and expectations of higher carbon prices. For example, we estimate that the total cost of deploying an European or American manufactured electrolyzer in 2021 stood at about $1,500 per kilowatt capacity, and we expect that to decline to just $400 per kilowatt by 2030. I stop there and now would like to give back the floor to Jal to introduce the Q&A session. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thanks, Greg. Again, yeah, now we'll move on to the Q&A section. And again, thank you so much for sharing valuable insights. So the first question that I have, and Jose, I think, and Greg, even you touched in your presentation, but can you talk more about the policy barriers for hydrogen production as low emission energy vector?
Yeah, I think I can kickstart. I think that more than policy barriers for today, there are certain barriers that are related to policy or regulation in case of low emission hydrogen production, particularly is on how countries define low emission hydrogen. We use this word low emission, but we have seen countries speaking about green hydrogen, low carbon, sustainable hydrogen, and that creates a lot of uncertainty on investors. Actually, we have just published a report specifically on this topic for the G7 negotiations of this year, in which we address the need of giving clarity to project developers, to investors, to potential users of what the countries mean with these definitions, and how the actors in a hydrogen market can demonstrate compliance against those regulations. So I think the first thing is regulatory clarity. This is creating a lot of doubts. And then another barrier that we need to mention is the lack of infrastructure. So today, most of the hydrogen production and demand are co-located in the same industrial facilities, but we can expect that now production will not necessarily be in the same locations as the demand. And also we can expect the appearance of a lot of distributed users of hydrogen. So you need to create the infrastructure to deliver the hydrogen from those big production centers to the big demand sectors, and also to these distributed users. And finally, the cost differential. Today, in general, the production of low emission hydrogen is more costly than the unabated fossil-based production. Some of our numbers, for example, the ones that have presented Gergely, and some numbers that are present in the Global Hydrogen Review, kind of challenge this understanding, but we have to be clear on something. So the fact that in the current energy crisis, in certain parts of the world, the production of low emission hydrogen may have become cheaper, does that not mean that it's still competitive? First of all, because we don't have the capacity yet of producing total emission hydrogen, we need to build it. And for build it, we need investments. And those investments are being hindered by the long-term uncertainty around the energy prices. So there is a need for having supporting schemes and policy incentives to create this demand. Depending on how the prices for fossil fuels will vary in the future, to see whether low emission hydrogen will be really competitive against them, both for using renewable or nuclear electricity or biomass, or the use of fossil fuels with CCUS.
Awesome. Thanks, Jose. Greg, would you like to add anything? If not, we can move on to the second question.
Yeah, no, thank you, John. Maybe just to complement what Jose said, that indeed regulatory uncertainty is one of the key issues, and then also I think it is important to know that we are talking about a vertical value chain when it comes to low emission hydrogen, and as such it would be maybe beneficial to have support mechanism and subsidy schemes which do take into account this vertical nature of the value chain, and which provide a more sort of holistic approach, and giving maybe a bit more focus also on the demand creation. I think in Northwest Europe that's one of the key issues. And maybe one third point is regarding the uncertainties related to the technology side. For instance, the storability of hydrogen in porous reservoirs, on which there is obviously need for more research and development. Thank you.
Right, and to piggyback on that, on the regulatory framework, there's another question, right? So does the regulatory framework include technology exchange or financial supports to developing economies for them to increase the hydrogen penetration?
So concretely on the exchange with emerging economies, I think we have not specifically addressed this topic on the analysis, but I think there's a significant number of international cooperation efforts concretely on this front. Now, whether this should be addressed through regulatory frameworks or actually through the provision of concessional finance or to the support of cooperation finance through multilateral development banks, I think this is an area that really requires a step up from donor countries, and this was actually flagged also on the Breakthrough Agenda recommendations from last year. Although this is not specific for hydrogen, I will say this is a touch upon many other technologies, but in the case of hydrogen is one of them, of course. And then definitely technology best practices and knowledge sharing. This is particularly important, especially because hydrogen is going to be used mainly on heavy industry applications, on aviation, on shipping, which are applications that require a significant investment or very capex intensive, so that increases the risk profile of the project. So it's very difficult to investors to facilitate those investment on emerging economies in this type of projects if there is not support also from the developed economies, which actually are the potential importers in many cases or the exporters of technology. So that will have a really important role to play. So I think more than on the regulatory framework, I will base the cooperation with emerging economies on two angles: first on finance, and then on technology knowledge sharing.
Great, thanks. And I know we are over time. We'll take two more questions if that's okay. So this is for Greg. So could you please give more precise examples of procurement rules or other policies for clean hydrogen demand creation?
Yes, thank you. That's an excellent question. I mean, it is basically giving, a certain threshold when you launch a public procurement on the share, which should be met with low emission hydrogen. And I think that's one basic scheme which can support the initial demand scale up of low emission hydrogen. I think we have seen some initial measures, but that's probably not sufficient yet to scale up the market. I don't know, Jose, if you would like to comment on that.
Yeah, I was thinking, one example that we have been aware from a couple of years ago, but I don't know if it has already been implemented yet, is in the case of Norway. Norway launched a contract for one of the ferry routes in the country that included the need of using, I don't know if it's hydrogen on hydrogen-derived fuels, but it was a contract that was granted on the provision that whenever the company took ownership of that product, of that ferry route, they will need to operate with those low emission hydrogen. I don't know even if it's low emission, but I think it's hydrogen or hydrogen derived fuels. And also, I mean, in the case of public procurement, in many cases may not be hydrogen specific, but if we can think about you know, the contract or the commission as a public infrastructure in which the steel that is going to be used in the infrastructure, a certain percentage should be low emission steel, or the cement should be low emission cement, according to the definition that obviously each government established for these products. This is an area, these are not directly hydrogen demands, but it can affect hydrogen demand. So both in steel and in cement, hydrogen is part of the pool of technologies that can help in producing these low emission products. So if you force the contractors to meet a certain share of the steel used in the project, basically because 100% probably will be impossible, at least in the short term, it can be a demand pool policy for those products. Now, whether those products will be produced with CCS, with direct electrification, with low emission hydrogen, that's up to debate. And one more than today is up to the decision of the contractors, but it can be another way of generating certain demand.
Great. And then we'll take this last question, and people will make sure that all of your questions are answered. And so what is the common form of hydrogen? How is it exported, basically? Is it in form of hydrogen or ammonia or other types of chemicals, basically? And do you see that variability across different continents, basically, or different regions?
So as I said in the presentation, actually hydrogen is not traded. And this is something that we have to keep in mind. It's just in certain demonstration projects, basically. Now, when we think a product that is derived from hydrogen, or two products that are hydrogen derived and that are widely traded today, are ammonia and methanol. None of them being low emission according to our definition of low emission products. Basically because there's nearly no production of low emission hydrogen. Now, if an international market for hydrogen and its derivatives, it's hydrogen-based fuels, develops, we can expect different ways of trading hydrogen. It can be in the form of liquefied hydrogen, it can be in the form of ammonia, it can be in the form of synthetic fuels, or it can be in the form of liquefied organic hydrogen carrier. And for short distances, it can be even in the form of compressed hydrogen in gas pipes. But for shipping are the other four alternatives that I mentioned. Now, whether one or the other will occur, it will depend on many different things. It seems clear that in the short term, ammonia is going to be the clear winner, basically because, as I mentioned, there is already trade on ammonia, we already have infrastructure, we already know how to do it. Now, for energy applications, that's another story. Japan has advanced quite a lot in the direct use of ammonia energy applications, but probably not in the rest of the world. Then there is a need to transform it back into hydrogen that has an energy penalty. So policy drivers, demand creation, and particularly technology innovation to see which technologies will actually be more efficient than others or less expensive will mark which of the different options for trading hydrogen will dominate in the future. But in the short term, it seems clear that it will be ammonia particularly as a replacement of the existing uses for ammonia more than the existing uses for hydrogen.
Yep. Thank you so much, Jose. And again, thank you, all the speakers and the participants. We really appreciate it. And we'll record this. So we are recording this presentation and we'll share the slide deck as well. And it will be uploaded on the Clean Energy Solution Center as well. So once again, thank you so much, Jose and Greg, for sharing your work, and Carla presenting the H2 Hydrogen Initiative. So we really appreciate.
Thank you very much for your invitation. Much appreciating, and looking forward for future webinars as well.
Yeah. So thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye. Thanks a lot.
Bye.